Good afternoon and welcome to Metropolitan United Church. We're so pleased that you've joined us for our latest performance in this series. My name is Jonathan Oldengarm and I'm the Minister of Music here at the church. We acknowledge that we are not the first people to stand in this place. For thousands of years, this land has been the traditional home of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, covered by Treaty 13. It is still home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to live, work, and worship here. I'd invite you to take a moment to make sure your cell phones are turned off, and I'd also ask you not to record or video any parts of the concert. You can always watch later in glorious 4K video on our church's YouTube channel. Live streaming of today's concert is made possible thanks to the generosity of Wayne Vance, and I'd like to thank Charlie Davidson, who's our technician in the booth today as well. Thank you for your presence, whether in person or online, and also for your generous gifts that make this series possible, and indeed all of the other musical activities that this church does. If you'd like to contribute and you're here in person, you can leave cash or tap at the back of the church. Online, metunited.ca/donate. Today's program is a kind of musical pilgrimage, and it forms part of our church's overall Lenten theme of various activities as spiritual practice, spiritual discipline. There are, of course, many ways in which music has been seen as a spiritual discipline historically, and I'll give a small talk right after the concert, immediately after the concert, to which you're warmly invited, and explore the four composers' perspectives on these questions in that talk. We'll have a little question and answer session afterwards. But for now, let's turn to the music itself. You'll see a few brief notes in the program that give you a little bit of a heads up as to where we're headed with this. But now, place to Arvo Pärt and some music written for the 950th anniversary of the cathedral in Speyer, Germany. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for joining us as part of this really special voyage of discovery musically. We're surrounded by music. In public spaces, indoor and outdoor, while we're on hold with Air Canada, while we're marching down the street wearing our earbuds. Despite, or maybe due to this constant exposure, we rarely listen with true, full attention. In the simplest definition, we experience music as organized sounds in time. There are aspects of rhythm and melody, harmony, volume, and timbre. The idea that music can be a standalone, abstract art form is really not the historical norm. If we look to the Bible, for example, the performance of music is always part of something else. It's either to accompany dancing, or it's to calm down an upset king, or it's a spontaneous act of thanksgiving and defiance by Paul and Barnabas in the prison. In most world cultures, traditional music is part of another activity, and the idea of just hiving off the music part from its companions would be unthinkable. How did we get here, and where were we before? Let's follow proper Western academic form, I am German trained, and go back to the ancient Greeks. If we look to Pythagoras and his followers, we find a metaphysical theory of music. The laws of music were a microcosm of the whole universe. The stars and planets and even the human soul moved in literal harmony, and this mirrored the relationship between musical tones. The fact that pleasing musical intervals could be reproduced by dividing a monochord into simple mathematical proportions proved the theory for the ancient Greeks. 1 to 2 gives the octave, 2 to 3 gives the fifth, and so on. A little bit later, Aristotle and Plato shifted their focus to the effects music had on society and on human character. Exposure to good music would make better citizens. Specific modes or scales could influence behavior, inducing calmness, love, anger, or melancholy. Their views on vocal versus instrumental music differed, though. The pragmatic Plato thought that all music really should have a vocal part for the human connection and the building of character, while Aristotle was, as usual, a little more nuanced and appreciated the value of purely instrumental music as well. The basis for J.S. Bach's understanding of music is largely found in these ancient Greeks' thinking. Although he lived during the beginning of the Enlightenment, he really was a child of the medieval world. He worked in relatively conservative Lutheran cities, and his letters that have come down to us show his firm belief in the divinely mandated medieval social hierarchy, the great chain of being. As a devout Lutheran and avid reader of Luther's writings, Bach held to a generous and Aristotelian appreciation of the value of beauty and music. Given his divinely ordained role as a professional musician within the great chain of being, he had a holy imperative to create the most perfect music he could and to train his students rigorously. We heard 3 pieces from the Orgelbüchlein, or little organ book, on whose title page Bach wrote the following. The little organ book, in which a beginning organist receives instruction as to performing a chorale in a multitude of ways, achieving mastery in the study of the pedal, since in the chorales contained herein, the pedal is treated entirely obbligato, that is, with its own independent part. In honor of our Lord alone, that my fellow man his skill may hone, composed by Johann Sebastian Bach, Kapellmeister, to His Serene Highness, the Prince of Anhalt-Köthen. In his later collection, the third part of the Klavierübung, the other parts of which include the Goldberg Variations, the Italian Concerto, the French Overture, and more, Bach writes the following title page. Third part of keyboard practice, consisting of various preludes on the Catechism and other hymns for the organ, prepared for music lovers and particularly for connoisseurs of such work, the recreation of the spirit, by Johann Sebastian Bach. If we consider these two title pages together, we see Bach the teacher, striving to share his technical skill with others, both as a player and a composer. In the Orgelbüchlein preface, Bach dedicates the work to the honor of our Lord alone, placing it squarely within his obligation to the great chain of being. No child of the Enlightenment would have used such language. In the Klavierübung 3, we're invited to enjoy recreation of spirit, which goes well beyond a simple brain teaser or two. For Bach, there was no separation between sacred and secular, temporal and spiritual. His pedagogy and musical understanding were sincere acts of devotion, proven by his own handwritten annotations in the Calaf Bible. These are the marginalia of a true believer who wrestled sincerely with practical questions of faith. Music and every aspect of life were for him a spiritual discipline. Times had changed by the 19th century. The Enlightenment and the rise of Romanticism ushered out the age of faith, replacing it with reason. Bach's holistic, all-encompassing devotion gave way to a far more subjective, individualistic worldview. Nature and belief systems abhor a vacuum, and for many thinkers in the 19th century, art itself became a religion rather than a vehicle for celebrating religion. This massive upheaval had consequences, and the rise of nationalism and a sense of nostalgia for the past were among them. It is in this context that we see an explosion of interest in earlier music, for instance, the music of J.S. Bach. A dominant theme in 19th century music and literature is the journey from darkness to light. A famous early example, of course, is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony with its brooding opening movement and ending in a triumphant major key finale. Franz Liszt's Weinen, klagen, sorgen, zagen, crying, complaining, worrying, sighing, is based on Bach's Church Cantata 12 of the same name. The bass line and the harmony must have been familiar to many of you from the Crucifixus of the B minor Mass, which Bach built upon his earlier composition. Liszt's work follows that iconic journey from dark to light, opening with the descending chromatic tetrachord that is the traditional musical symbol of death. Think about Purcell, When I Am Laid in Earth, and many other lament pieces. There are dynamic and emotional ebbs and flows, but we generally crescendo and accelerate. The tension climaxes on a long-held diminished seventh chord and releases during a short interlude. We find redemption and a triumphant resolution in the chorale Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan. What God ordains is always right. Bach also used that same chorale to close his Cantata 12. Liszt's life was full at the time of composition in 1863. His first marriage had collapsed. He had alienated himself from his two children. He had withdrawn from public touring as a piano virtuoso, and he and his lover, Princess Carolina zu Sayn-Wittgenstein, had moved to Rome to seek a papal annulment of her marriage, but were unsuccessful. There are many details within Weinen, klagen that feel autobiographical. For example, the interlude I just mentioned is unmistakably based on the opening bars of Wagner's recently composed opera Tristan and Isolde, which is a tale of unrequitable and unconsummated love. Not long after the annulment debacle, Liszt took minor religious orders and was known as abbé. His late compositions often have an introspective, minimalist, and almost experimental character. To compare and contrast, Bach's church cantata tells the story of the believer's journey from pain and despair to hope and acceptance, guided by faith and divine grace throughout. Liszt's adaptation of the same Bach work reflects the different age in which he lived and transforms that devotional narrative into both a sweeping musical tableau and an autobiographical manifesto. The excesses of Romanticism and the shattering fallout of the two world wars set many late 20th century thinkers on a quest for deeper meaning. The French composer and ornithologist Olivier Messiaen and the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt have found different paths to reach this goal. Messiaen's music is informed by his love of birdsong, a system of scales called the modes of limited transposition, and the traditional Roman Catholic faith and liturgy, Gregorian chant in particular. Messiaen's language remained remarkably consistent throughout his career, and the Livre du Saint Sacrament, commissioned in 1984, is his last major work. It is a vast 14-movement meditation on the Holy Eucharist, the most sacred act in the Christian faith. In Dieu, caché, we heard Gregorian chant at the opening, followed by the songs of grackles and other birds, with chordal passages built upon the modes. Messiaen saw organ music reaching its highest purpose and deepest significance when it was played and heard in the service of the liturgy, thus as the most integrated spiritual discipline imaginable. Arvo Pärt's music, written since the 1970s, is composed in a minimalist language, featuring small cells of notes or rhythmic patterns, an intentionally limited harmonic language, and a holy simplicity. In a 2014 interview, Pärt explained that the simplification of his style came about following a major personal crisis. He felt he had crawled through a narrow tunnel, and in order to emerge, he had had to leave everything non-essential behind. Annum per Annum was composed for the 950th anniversary of the Cathedral of Speyer in Germany, and it appropriately evokes the distant past. The 5 sections are headed KGCSA, Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei, the 5 elements of the ordinary of the Mass. We've explored 4 quite different cases this afternoon, and now the question remains, how do we find our own understanding of music as a spiritual discipline? There are, of course, far more answers than people, particularly in today's fragmented world in which we all come with such different lived experiences. I would propose a few thoughts. First, that we listen less and hear more. Perhaps it's because I make music for a living, but I almost never listen to background music while doing something else. When I listen, I really try to be fully immersed in the moment and in what I'm hearing. All of you are here, and I think you would agree that live music is always the best when possible. There's something completely different about being present while a living person creates a performance in real time than there is in listening to even the best recordings. If you play an instrument yourself, recreationally or professionally, set yourself some long-term goals that aren't related to what you have to do. Play through all of Bach's 48 preludes and fugues over a year, or Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words, or all of the hymns in a hymnal. As in any good pilgrimage, you'll find unexpected blessings along the way. If you're a churchgoer and you love hymns, read up about them so that you'll sing with understanding and enthusiasm. Study the texts. The great hymn writers are not only great poets, but they're also great theologians who usually only have a few lines in which to expound whole complex doctrines. If your tastes run to art song, study the poetry of the songs you love. Again, reading the poetry separately from the musical setting will give you a deep appreciation for the genius of a Hugo Wolf or a Franz Schubert. Similarly with the Bach cantatas, sometimes when we read the libretti away from the music, we think that was fairly feeble, but then Bach's music suddenly lifts it up and lifts it off the page. Finally, allow yourself to be immersed and aware. Lean into Aristotle's belief that music can physically and spiritually transport you as you listen, and that great music can guide your heart, mind, and body to places you never dreamt possible. Thank you.